This show is part of the Darkmoor Podcast Network.
To join our community Discord or see more content from our members, visit darkmoorpodcasts.com.
On today's episode, we explore the dark side of a campaign, justification in our choices, and the consideration that damage is not the only outcome we seek. This is the DM Shower Thoughts. Welcome back. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to today's episode of the DM Shower Thoughts, the show where we talk about our shower thoughts in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons and other tabletop scenarios, and how to become your best self through gaming. My name is Adamus.
I'm John. Oh, and joining me today, we have our new kitten, Chadwick the cat, who you may hear meowing in the background as I talk.
Hi, Chadwick.
And I'm Ian, without a cat.
No, yours are running around somewhere.
Yeah, they like hiding. One of them is super skittish, and the other one just doesn't care.
Sometimes Patchouli comes down here and kind of ventures forward, but only if I've got the heater on. And when she comes up, she's like, "Hey!" And I start to pet her, and she runs. Oh my god, the video of this kitten is adorable. I'm having an overload of cuteness. So before I die from cuteness, let's have a shower thought, shall we?
Sounds good. So one of the burning questions I've had about D&D, which is how you make an evil campaign successful. Mm-hmm. A lot of campaigns are usually good aligned. I would even go so far as to say about 80 to 90% of them are good aligned. And that's just because of this assumption that Wizards of the Coast kind of makes when creating the setting that your characters are supposed to be kind of archetypical heroes. You are looking to save the realm from, an impending threat, or you're going to go on an adventure and just help out some people because you're nice guys. And it makes sense because most people, when they come to these kinds of fantasy settings, they're more interested in living out this heroic tale of, I am known throughout the land for being this really great guy. And I'm good at the things I do, whatever those things are. So like monk, barbarian, however you want to do it. But there is still a niche to be filled with evil campaigns, because some people are interested in that cloak and dagger. That's why in the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, Skyrim, and the other ones too, I'm sure, there are the Dark Brotherhood, and they are an assassins guild that are all sneaky and shadowy, and their whole job is to kill people for money. And that makes sense, because a world is not fleshed out unless you have a dark and a light side of the coin. So when you want to create an evil campaign, how do you really go about that without oversaturating the generally good aligned morals of the player and making the character come to life through these evil aligned decisions? And that's my question, really, because it sounds cool in theory, but just because so few people do it, it can be difficult to really make that campaign successful.
A lot of people, when they approach the evil campaign concept, are coming from it from a place of chaos. And that chaos can be really taxing on the game state and the setting itself. A lot of people will approach it like a kid would. I'm evil! And they're just there to see the world burn. There is a chaos, a chaotic evil aspect that I've seen a few people play out, and that's when the campaign or even the one-shot scenario in an evil setting or an evil characters, if you will, just sort of implodes. There's no trust among the players because we're evil. We don't trust each other. Or there's no values. There are no standards or bonds, or even just standard traits beyond I'm evil. And I'm saying it like that because it's like a little kid going, I'm evil. I break it because I want to break it. I break it because I can. And there's a different kind of relationship there. Whereas if we really delve deep into the nuance of what makes a character evil, it's more about the gradient between their decisions and what they're willing to do. Whereas I think a good aligned character has like a line they don't cross, and maybe an evil character crosses that line, or their relationship with their choices has a deeper meaning and nuance to what they do and how they do it and why they do it. Like the ends justify the means. Maybe what they're doing has a good outcome, but the way they justify the means, even if the means consider evil acts. And there's a higher complexity there. You can have, a neutral evil entity, and they're just willing to cross that line that a good creature wouldn't. Or there's a code that they follow that's different from others. And I've seen other people be lawful evil. They want to be crime lords, and they know that what they're doing, like the individual actions that they take, are probably evil in the eyes, like they are committing evil acts or even monstrous acts. But the end result is they are creating an order. There are too many crime bosses. There's too much chaos. There's too much going on. I make the world a more orderly place by becoming the one that rules them all and destroying the competition. So now the status quo is not quo, and I need to break it and rebuild it. And that was also very interesting when you think about, are these evil characters instead the heroes of their own story given their new perspectives? That's how we can, at least from my point of view, you can deepen this role-playing understanding and deepen where their choices lie beyond the chaos. Like many demons are just chaotic. We're here to watch the world burn. And then you have other creatures that are they're not aligned with simple chaos. They're aligned with a deeper connection to why they do what they do. And isn't that interesting to then explore? And I think that's why I'm very intrigued by an evil campaign, because I want to explore those choices. And that's why gray campaigns are so interesting, because you can move between people can start evil, like making making evil acts and justifying them. But if they start to change where those justifications lie, they may actually be pushing more toward redemption and more toward good. And then the same works for others, that if you are a good aligned character, you now realize from a different perspective, perhaps you are creating evil acts. And what does that do to your code? And how does that change your explorative nature? Are you actually the villain in another person's story? There's a lot there.
So Ian mentioned something which is good to keep in mind, which is Wizards of the Coast assumes that your characters are going to be heroic. How that heroism manifests, of course, is going to be different to each individual player. And there's room to make other decisions, but ultimately, there is this kind of underlying assumption with a lot of D&D stories that your characters are good, whether they're the good alignment or they're neutral or whatever. They aren't going to help Tiamat destroy the realms, right? Or they're not going to help, the true enemy of Storm King's Thunder, or they're not going to help the Elemental Eye and the 4 evil elemental cults or anything like that in Princes of the Apocalypse. Now, I would disagree that most players are excited by that, right? Most players, when they come to D&D, are used to having a game experience be structured and limited, right? So even if they come from a board game or a video game, even an open world video game, if we take Skyrim or Witcher as an example, when you talk to people, you still have limited dialogue options. You can't just say anything and then have the story respond in real time in the way that you can in a tabletop scenario. That sheer freedom is what excites players. The fact that they really could try anything. And, there are some things that are destined not to work, but the fact that there's a die roll of, well, maybe this could work, that's what excites players. And what can happen, and we experienced this introducing Dungeons & Dragons to our community, was some players would go out of their way to pick the chaotic option just to kind of see what would happen. And it wasn't necessarily evil, it was just chaotic, right? So it's how do we mess with the DM? How do we mess with the serious story? How can we create a really funny joke out of this, you know? This is where you try to run Rise of Tiamat and your group names themselves In Search of Waffles, right? Because they want to make a joke out of it. And you can also celebrate that game experience. There's nothing wrong with having a parody campaign or, you know, not super taking it seriously, just wanting to kick down the door, kill some monsters, get some treasure, do some stuff. There's nothing wrong with that. Personally, I have found that I have played games like that, and they aren't the most enriching experiences, but they can be really relaxing and they can be really fun. When it comes to, I think there's a difference between an evil campaign and evil characters. And I think having that distinction is a little bit more useful and a little bit more actionable as a tool. So for me, like you were saying, Adam, an evil character is someone who's willing to cross certain moral lines in order to complete an outcome, right? Sometimes that outcome is good, sometimes it's neutral, sometimes it's evil. So like if the outcome is I want to get paid, somebody is willing to pay me a lot of money to kill another NPC, right? And it's more the Dark Brotherhood storyline. That is an evil act, and the outcome is also evil. There's a dead person, but the motive is neutral. The motive is get paid. And like we were talking about earlier today, getting paid is just what you do. Like, why do you work at Subway? To get paid. It's not an evil outcome, right? But, you know, there's a difference between making somebody a $5 footlong and killing them. So, like, you know, it's what can define an evil character are the methods they are willing to partake in order to reach an outcome. Sometimes you have characters that are looking for a good outcome. So this reminds me of like Alucard from Hellsing, right? Where he is a monster that does monstrous things, and he doesn't even care about innocent bystanders. He'll just shoot him. He doesn't care. But the overall outcome is he's removing other monsters from the world. So it's a net good outcome through an evil method that may produce more evil than good. And that's another interesting question. And then you've got characters that are evil for evil's sake, right? So it's an evil outcome of I want to be in control and I want to be powerful. I don't care. Whoever gets in my way has to be crushed. And they all have to bow to me, right? That's kind of like the Loki in Avengers kind of like, you know, it's an evil, selfish outcome. There's no debate to it. And the methods are also evil. So I think the difference between evil characters and an evil campaign is that an evil campaign is an exploration of the evil decisions that you know you are going to make. Whereas a gray campaign, there's usually an evil, neutral, good option. You know going into an evil campaign that you're going to be doing up to evil stuff, right? For example, I would be uncomfortable with that, right? Where I know everyone is going to have to do evil stuff, as opposed to being confronted with the choice of high road, middle road, low road, you know? And that's what I found Grey Owl so fascinating is you would have characters that sometimes would do evil things for a good reason. They'd also do evil things for an evil reason. You also had characters that would do good things for a good reason, or they would do good things and it turned out that it led to an evil outcome. So to me, I personally find the gray model kind of more interesting. Although, again, you might have players that find value in exploring the evil options, and both as a player and whatever character they create, what lengths they're willing to go to and what lengths they aren't.
I'm going to use the Shadowfell example for this of a player that feels very energized when these options present themselves, and it was a really good illustration of consequences and in adapting to those consequences after the decision was made. So the group was infiltrating, I suppose, a sort of gala kind of scenario, finding different ways to get inside. This character had made himself look like a servant, kind of a diminutive to the other players, the other characters, and was led to the kitchen by the archmage of this house, who is an orc, a very imposing figure, very, very intelligent, and we know to be very powerful. And this, through some really, really clutch rolls and very creative thinking, the player was able to convince this archmage to try an apple. This apple, just a little apple that when the character had cut it with his dagger, the dagger had a paralytic poison on it. So he kind of coated the apple with the poison by doing a deception check and cutting the apple and offering it to the orc. The orc failed his Constitution saving throw and went into a paralyzed state. In this moment, the rest of the players are panicking because they didn't know this was a thing that this player was planning to do. But apparently he'd been planning it for some time, knowing that this archmage was very powerful and didn't want to, if things went south, have this creature against the party. They already had their odds stacked against them, so this was a way for them to, or at least in his mind, for them to eliminate a very possible threat. He then proceeded to murder this person while they were paralyzed there on the floor. And then this creature is very heavy, and they're trying to move the body, and this is when they themselves were not discovered, but the body was discovered because they couldn't move it in time. It's an orc. This proceeded to have a huge lockdown scenario in the gala where their alarm spells went off, all the lights go out, and they have creatures with night vision that start roaming the halls, dark gnolls that are now kind of like the guard squad. And it changed immediately. It was a cool moment in Roll20 where I got to make everything just go black. And now you can only see the light that's generated by the space that you're in, and those of you with dark vision kind of go invisible and start to sneak around to try and find a way out while everyone else hides. And it became this beautiful, awesome stealth mission. It adapted into this awesome, awesome session. And yet, it was because of this decision. Now, this decision was very dangerous. It was very, could have gone south very quickly had this roll not worked, had he made his Constitution saving throw. But this risk was justified by the character and the player because they're like, well, my alignment is more evil, and I'm willing to make the hard choices to protect my allies and to eliminate threats. And it was this thing, like, this was a horrible way to kill somebody, like really horrific. And yet it still played out in a very strengthening way, in a very dynamic way to provide a satisfying outcome. We went to a kind of a dark place for a little bit there, while the rest of the players are going, "Oh my God, that's terrible!" And now we gotta figure out what to do next. A truly interesting illustration of making a decision based upon a certain logic train without talking to the party, and then dealing with the consequences of that action. And every now and then there's an echo of those consequences. Now there's a mercenary that's seeking the murderer of this archmage, hired by the head of the manor that hired the archmage. And he's like, whoever killed him is going to pay. You have to go find them. And now they're tracking the scent that was on the apple, which is one of the characters. So you have an extraplanar bounty hunter that's now chasing after them. So there are consequences to this action beyond just the party shutting down. And yet, in a certain light, that action is still justified, because had the gala went south and they were supposed to do a heist or something and they had to face him, it could have been pretty rough. So was it the right decision? Maybe, in a certain point of view. And they're exploring that gray area, but that was a definitively evil act of how to eliminate a threat. Yet, and it had some difficult spaces there. It was a hard thing to navigate. And when you look back on it, there were a lot of different ways that could have gone.
You said something interesting, and it has to do with justifying your decisions, justifying your actions as a character for the resulting outcome, and that can include all sorts of consequences or whatever. But I think that warrants defining some differences, some neurolinguistics, if you will, about the difference between justification and compromise when it comes to your players' actions and their alignment. So I actually just drew up a little grid here of kind of like the alignment grid, but not about alignment, only about methods and motives. And I did the spectrum of good, neutral, evil on methods and good, neutral, evil on motives. There's about 9 different combinations of what you can do there as a character when you're faced with a decision and comparing that to your motives. And the third thing was the right decision. So justification, compromise, and the right decision. I think we've said before on a podcast, the right decision is the decision that achieves the party's goals most directly, most efficiently, I guess you could say. And so whatever the party's goals were in this case, which was to infiltrate and get past this guard, that's the party's goals. Eliminating the guard feels like the right decision, regardless of your alignment or something, because you get the most advantageous outcome when you're making the right decision, which is something that John has said something before about. Now, justifying, I think in an evil campaign, that's where that comes up much more often, is justifying your actions because you have these motives that are driving you. So you're justifying your actions based on what you're willing to do to achieve that goal.
I think one of the things that you risk with an evil campaign is the fact that because you're willing to cross a moral line, how deep you're planning on choosing to explore the darkness, right? And for a lot of people, their definitions of evil, what's forgivable or unforgivable, are vastly different. And what themes people are willing to explore or unwilling to explore, that's left up to an individual. So I would say if you're planning on running an evil campaign, one of the first things to establish is what your definition of evil is and what you're thinking some evil acts might be. So, for example, if you're planning on running a Dark Brotherhood type of campaign, right, where it's like all of you are assassins that are okay killing people, how you kill people or, what kind of bounties you accept or what your personal moral codes, that's more up to you to freely define. But the idea is that how we define evil here is through assassination, right? So, because there are plenty of evil topics that we could explore here. And there are even things like substance use, right? There might be some players that's affected their real lives very directly, and they would feel extremely uncomfortable fantasizing about it. Because, and I remember Jeremy Crawford talking about this too when it came to D&D's relationship with alcohol. So, alcohol is a storytelling device that's in Dungeons and Dragons. One of the most common tropes is that players meet in a tavern. They meet at a bar. Dwarves, alcohol has a very specific relationship to their culture, and it's right down to their mechanics with their advantage on saving throws against poison, right? That being said, there might be people at your table that alcoholism has affected them directly or indirectly, and it may not be an appropriate topic to bring up in your fun, relaxing fantasy setting. For other people, it might be part of the social experience. Like Adam has mentioned drinking and dragons before. And, when we started Grey Owls, of course, I stopped because I realized I couldn't role play the way as dramatically as I wanted to. But it was clear that it's like, hey, it's like a BYOB thing. Like this is going to be a more relaxed environment of 21 and up. We can relax a little more, let our hair down, so to speak. And, that was part of the experience a lot of people looked forward to. And it's not going to be appropriate for all tables. So first, kind of getting on the same page of what are we willing to explore? Also, what's off the table, So Adam has mentioned before on both his blog, maybe even in the podcast, there are certain topics, crimes, things that don't even exist in his world. no, but it never gets addressed because it doesn't happen, because it, for whatever reason, doesn't even cross anybody's mind. What would your world look like if that didn't even exist? That dark, deep, ugly thing, you know? So, and that's part of the freedom you get in creating your own world. So, and I think if you're going to partake in an evil campaign, you have to have absolute trust in your DM and everyone at the table. And if there's any sort of doubt, either squish it right away or choose to bow out, you know, because this is one of those things I can definitely see it breaking up friendships if not handled correctly. And it can be one of those things where if two people have different levels of comfort and they don't choose to respect each other's boundaries, the storytelling and the real world relationships can get real ugly real fast. So, you know, evil campaigns, when do you choose to cut to black versus describe things? What are you choosing to describe? We've always elected for more of a Lord of the Rings approach of like, you know, you decapitate the bad guy and blood, right? There might be some people that makes really uncomfortable. There might be some people that get a little bit too into it, you know? So finding that balance of like, you know, what's going to be exciting and energizing and allow us to explore a part of ourselves we might otherwise be uncomfortable to without, again, overstepping it on our end so that we don't want to play anymore.
I was looking up the word justify as a verb. For an evil campaign, justification is very important because you need to be able to you know, reason with your actions and your motives. So the definition, according to, I think, Webster here, is that to justify is to show or prove to be right or reasonable. And it involves there being a good reason for doing something. And so in an evil campaign, I think that's what's attractive about an evil campaign, is that kind of question comes up more often when you start leaning towards the darker side of people's nature. When do we draw that line? Like John was saying, what are the boundaries? What are the expectations we're setting up for our players when we say, I want to do an evil campaign or even a gray campaign? Because you're allowing that possibility for them to have the thought experiment of justifying their actions as a player character. And so I think that's really one of the hallmarks of what makes an evil campaign successful, is being able to justify the things you're doing without going too far, like John was saying, whatever too far means for the player.
Yeah, and I think, so to come back to what's the most advantageous outcome, that really calls into question what like an evil campaign means. So for example, one of the latest D&D modules is Descent into Avernus, which is like, you're literally in hell and it's not a very nice place. And it, arguably, one of the most advantageous things is to give in to the temptation of evil, right? And that it's actually a challenge Chris Perkins, who wrote the book, gave to its players is, can you get through it without being evil, you know? And so, you know, there are things like there are certain vehicles that are powered by soul coins, which is considered an evil act to sacrifice somebody's soul in order to power your war machine, right? That's an advantageous outcome. But is it if your players are compromising their morality? So now you're choosing, do I take the higher road and sacrifice power and advantage, or do I justify, like Ian just said, the reasoning, the ends justify the means, and we actually end up mechanically in an advantage, even though morally we've compromised ourselves, right? And I think that it all kind of depends on laying out the groundwork of what the premise of the campaign is too. So for example, I would get really excited about an evil campaign if it's like, you guys might come up with choices where you have to do evil stuff, but it's because your characters have been promised that they can be redeemed at the end. So it's like something where it's like, let's say you're in hell, right? And you're in like the first layer of hell, you're in Avernus, and the lord of that lair says, if you go do this evil thing for me, you get out of hell, right? You get to go up to Elysium or one of the nice planes. So what evil thing are you willing to do in order to redeem yourself? To me, that's a good outcome. That's an interesting thing to explore. Evil for evil's sake, which attracts some players because they want to explore that freedom, that to me is a little less interesting to me, but it could be really more interesting to them. So I think when you're running an evil campaign, the other end of the alignment spectrum, chaotic to lawful, like Adam said, also comes much more into play. So, when you say you're running a good campaign, that can have a lot of expressions, but a chaotic evil campaign and a chaotic or a lawful evil campaign, those look very, very different from each other, just based on what the players feel like they're allowed to do and what they're not.
The people who really are energized by the concept of an evil campaign, I wonder if there's another branching point here. Do they want to play evil characters that can make evil decisions and have that freedom of those decisions? Or do they want to play monstrous characters? I want to play traditionally evil creatures and see how I would drive that mech. What if I played an imp? What if I played a chain devil? How would I play a chain devil? With all the features and powers and abilities and perspectives of a chain devil, now that I'm driving the chain devil, where does it go from there? Could I be a redeemed chain devil? What would that look like? What sort of decisions would I then make? If I were playing a beholder, with all the weirdness of a beholder, how would I play a beholder? What options are now available to me? And for some players have experienced, they want to play monsters. They want to play monsters in the monster manual. And a lot of the time, like we've experienced with the two other times that we've done the Labyrinth one-shot scenario that you guys are literally monsters, you've chosen to be good monsters. You've chosen to fight for saving the child, saving the day. You want to rescue someone. You fight the bad guys, even though traditionally you would be monsters. Now, that's also a scenario that's sort of painted in a way to sort of sculpt you toward being the good guys. But I also wonder about, almost from a divergent space, if we're approaching an evil campaign, the discussions that I've had so far with Night Owls Season 4, which is supposed to be like, quote-unquote, dark owls, that the idea being that you are on the flip side of the coin. We originally presented it as you're the counterparty, or you're even the bad guys. You're the ones who are working against the Night Owls. But then what does that mean? And when we started selecting races and opening the door for that, I started opening up the door further to monstrous races. Like if you are a tiefling, you could actually choose to be a devil. And what does that do? And how does that deepen your options and your understandings? Where can you go with that? Why would you be a fiend? What is the story that got you there in the first place? And then what are you going to do about it? Are you a creature that has leaned into chaos? Or are you a creature that goes, well, I'm here now and I'd like to get out. I don't like this place. But even though you're a monster in the traditional sense, how do we expand upon that idea? It becomes a lot more interesting when you have the helm of a player driving a quote-unquote monster, and rather than the bestiary driving the monster.
So that sounds like a really exciting premise. My not even rebuttal, just like something to think about bullet point, is making sure to have a party that meshes. So the one time I've ran like an evil game, right? And it wasn't even designed to be like that. It was a one-shot adventure I pulled from Fandelver. And all of the players just decided, you know what, we'll all be chaotic evil. We'll see how that works out. It ended up in a TPK and I don't know, I couldn't tell if it was a joke or not, but they said they didn't enjoy it. That had nothing to do with how I ran the scenario. It had everything to do with the decisions they decided to make. And they ended up undercutting themselves so much that not only were they a player character versus the environment or versus the quest, they were player characters versus each other constantly. And like you said, Adam, at the beginning, it was so taxing of like, I had pre-built characters that I let them choose from. There was one character that's a healer who decided not to heal any of his party members because even though they had a defined quest, they decided not to follow it because they were so bent on being evil that they didn't help each other, and there wasn't any point to it. So one of the things to consider is, like, let's say you have a character in an evil campaign and they want to explore that. They have these evil monsters' powers and they want to redeem themselves. Well, what now happens with the party's dynamic when another player character wants to just experience wacky, chaotic evil? And then another character is that lawful evil where they think that they're doing good, kind of like that Thanos mindset of, I am the necessary evil, but I have faith that the outcome of my actions will produce a greater amount of good. You end up having more conflict trying to pick what the overall plot is, and characters actively working against each other so that they can't get that plot. That all of a sudden, now you're spending more time wasting energy on dynamics than like picking something, which is why I think if you have an idea of like, the assumption is that you'll work together. The assumption is that you'll follow through on the quest, but how you choose to individually express that, let's have a conversation as a group.
That's why that original thought was on chaos. Like if you approach an evil campaign, the very simplistic view is everything is chaotic and we're all evil, so we don't trust each other and therefore blah, and it implodes and it's not very much fun. Whereas the unifying concept behind the idea of the counterparty, if we were existing in the sense of a heroic party, the good guys for the first 3 seasons of Night Owls, the 4th season would be we are the bad guys. But even though we're the bad guys, we're like the B team, but we're a team. We are a team. We have the idea of the overlord, that you serve an overlord and you believe in the mission of the overlord, or maybe you're trying to overthrow the overlord, put into his good graces. Maybe there are other motives in there, but you do serve an overlord and you want to look good for the overlord, and you are working in a team of people. So the idea is you should still be complementary of your various party members. You should still synergize, because if you don't, you die. And that's bad. And if you die, especially if you're like an infernal entity, maybe your soul goes into a very, very bad place and you don't want to go back there, man. That's not fun. And maybe you have a bigger incentive to like, I need to survive. So let's make sure that the cleric survives so that he can heal me because I don't want to die again. If you're a creature that keeps getting reincarnated in an imp that keeps getting smaller and smaller, or like, there could be a really funny viewpoint there, but also you have an incentive to not die, but I want to approach it as right up front in my social contract. It says for season 4 of Night Owls, you are a team. You might have a larger spectrum of the decisions that you will have to make, and you will be able to choose a good option, a neutral, and an evil option. You might have gradients between, but the door is opened to make the evil option, to like take that decision and see where it goes. And there are consequences to each of those actions, but it allows us to explore them, also understanding that, at least for now, you serve a traditionally evil entity. And what does that do for its goals and where your viewpoints are? And we'll see where it goes. But I love the idea that we have to establish, no matter what your alignment, if you are working in a party of people, you are working together. And the scariest teams of entities in fiction are teams. I think back to Legend of Korra Season 3. We have the Black Lotus. I love the Black Lotus.
They're the Red Lotus. Black Lotus is the bad card. Red
You're
Lotus
right.
is the bad guys.
Sorry. Red Lotus. Darn it. The Lotus people. But so cool to see how they synergize with each other and how they would trust each other. They made sure that we got to go get the band back together because we are stronger together. And yeah, a good team is terrifying to the opposing side. The bad guys should synergize and they should be a good team, because then they serve as a good counterparty to the quote unquote good guys.
Just as also a point of consideration with that, now you're also limiting what kind of evil can be expressed. You're limiting the amount of evil choices because one of the interesting things about evil characters was when they act selfishly, right? So I think back to our first session of Night Owl or Gray Owls, how interesting it was that that Serenity, the drow, made the evil choice of running away and leaving everyone else to die to save herself, you know? That created a distinct moment of this is the spectrum of alignments that we're working with. And if you assume that you're part of a team, you have limited the storytelling possibilities there, which might be a good thing. It might get some stuff out of the way first, but it is going to limit the organic development of the party's relationships. So, and part of Serenity's story arc was learning how to trust the other people in the party, you know, for her self-preservation, right? And then eventually she was able to become less and less selfish over time, but that was a character arc. And I don't necessarily, I think it has to do with the structure of your game. I think if you want to do more storytelling and you want somebody's story arc to be how to be less selfish, I think everyone else has to kind of buy into the fact that selfishness might be part of the game to begin with. And maybe not everyone is comfortable with that, and that's okay too. But I know for the evil character I'm running right now in Curse of Strahd, super selfish. Only cares about what he's doing and how many heads he can pop. There's not that consideration of team dynamics. Although as a player, and this is kind of where I don't think metagaming is a bad thing. As a player, I acknowledge what are the actions that are going to hurt the party's dynamics. And as a player or as a character, I'll make this decision once, knowing that my character will learn by the bad outcome. And so that, you know, you've got always that meta approach where it's, I think for an evil campaign, you have to have players that are willing to look at the structure of the thing and acknowledge the real world relationships so that they can go right up to that line without creating damage in the relationships.
There is a big difference between, like, to reference that first scenario that you subbed for me, John, and they played evil characters and it just imploded. There was a constant representation and personification of selfish actions that hurt the party's dynamic. And when in hearing it from them as well, they were super frustrated. It's like every little thing we just found a way to work against each other. Every little thing at every single moment. Why did we do that? And they had it in their heads that that's what evil characters do. That's just what we do. So we're going to do that. And that sucked. When really you can still make selfish actions that a good aligned character may resist, like a fully good, like centered character. But that's the other thing about Gray Owls. We got to see the spectrum, but it wasn't like every single decision that person made was always selfish. It's when met with certain conditions, you know, when push came to shove, it was screw you guys, I'm out, instead of standing with the group, instead of recognizing, well, maybe I'm safer with everyone. Even that, actually, I'm safer with everyone. That's a selfish choice, but it's still smart. You know, it's a little bit better. I stick with the party because maybe I can help them and they'll help me. Now we're approaching away from that selfishness. But the idea is when you're presented with certain outcomes, I'm presenting this with the caveat of every character that comes in has, I won't say a debilitating flaw, but a flaw that they know is a weakness of them. It's a lie that they tell themselves that they have to kind of lean into, and maybe that's the beginning of their arc. But they'll all have something where someone like, I really have a hard time with greed, or I really have a hard time with my own preservation, even when I need to stand and fight. Like what are their true fears? And being in this scenario, they might get more opportunities to lean into those flaws, but it isn't all the time, because that's boring. If you are always an act of chaos, the chaotic creatures die. Like, it's just they're gone because they don't last very long. Most of the time, the ones who stick around are complex. There's a lot more to them than just watching the world burn, because the things that want to watch the world burn get destroyed by the heroes.
I do like evil characters. I prefer, when I play an evil character, that there's gonna be other characters that I can shock with the fact that I'm evil. You know, that's what gives it like value or meaning or whatever. That like, you know, we're running Curse of Strahd, and you know, we've got our Tabaxi, who was kind of along for the ride for an adventure, and ooh, it's a lot of gothic horror elements. I'm not sure I joined the right party. And then, you know, you've got the tortured, somewhat neutral, maybe good character that has kind of like the ghostly element to them. And then you've got the kind of happy-go-lucky monk cleric person that's got shadow powers, but she's in it for the long run. And then, you know, you've got the evil vampire that eats people and is super scary and has all this horrific imagery and seemingly delights in that aspect of himself. The contrast is what I feel makes that character fun to play. And even like Kurama from Night Owls started as a lawful evil character. He was going to play by the rules, but he wasn't above torturing a person or two to get more information. So, and, you know, when something bad would happen, he wouldn't bat an eye. Of course, we learned that his alignment and his arc changed over the course of the 20 episodes or whatever. But at the same time, the value of the evil character was because there were good characters there to almost get the shock value out of. And I'm not sure if it was an all evil campaign, I'd want to play a good character, which is kind of what happened with Grey Owls, where it was like all these evil characters making evil decisions, and it was almost shocking that I was the one player that was good.
Yeah, and that's kind of funny because it's like all these guys are doing these evil actions, and your character's just over there like, why? Like, as if there's some way by them explaining it to you that they could justify what they just did. That's like, I think that's an interesting thing, is that not all people, but a lot of people say that their gut reaction is to ask why, as though somehow an explanation will make it better. And sometimes that's true, but I don't think it's true for evil decisions. And one thing that you were talking about there, having a good character in an evil campaign, or an evil character in a good campaign, or at least neutral campaign, I think that speaks to the idea of oversaturation, which can really come across like a lot in gothic horrors, in evil campaigns, where if you don't have anything to compare to, it's not evil. It's just normal. It's just boring. In Curse of Strahd, they highlight this in the start of the book. Make sure that you show your characters, your players, something light in the world, because this is a dark setting. There's a lot of madness. There's a lot of just destruction, evil, corruption. If they're surrounded by that all the time, then there's no point to it, because it's the status quo. It's not diverging from the good and going to the evil. It's just normal. It's Tuesday with Shia LaBeouf, you know? I think that's something to consider for anybody who's listening to this and looking to create an evil campaign or dark aligned campaign. Don't oversaturate it. Make sure you have variety to contrast.
Shadowfell has so many moments of powerful levity, like personified by the players, interacting with each other in very big and comical almost ways, but also they do a little more deep role playing where they explore darker themes and difficult backstories. And then also I've made it so to make the Shadowfell more, say, palatable in a way. The Feywild has been seeping into the darkness. There are elements of the Shadowfell that have seeped into Feywild, and Feywild has seeped into the Shadowfell. And that has created these little pockets of interesting levity, like casting Fey magic in the Shadowfell and seeing what happens there. But we're also seeing that the characters are mostly gray, and then there are a couple that are sort of naive and actually much more good aligned. So everyone in the party, save probably for one, is still fighting for the good decision. They're still fighting for the right choice. They're not trying to be evil, but they are in a setting that rewards evil choices, or rewards subservience to the evil entities currently in power. And instead, they're seeking to undermine those in power. They're seeking to reset the status quo. They want the Shadowfell to be good, or if it's not going to be, to get out of it. And it's the you can have that dark space, and then also have players and characters that kind of stand out from it because they don't align with precisely what's around them, that seek to find the good in it. And if they cannot find the good, don't want to wallow in it. So they'll seek to leave, and that becomes their goal, to find a place where they really belong, which I just find to be truly fascinating. Welcome back, everybody. And I wanted to talk briefly about something that I read on a blog, and I got some feelings on the subject, but it really got me pondering first about leveling up one's understanding of the mechanics of the game, and the roles of a class that's presented. Because if you misunderstand the role of a class, like really fundamentally misunderstand it, or believe that all classes fall into one category or one use, one role, I think that can also color the perception of a class. So I was reading some blog posts specifically on Astral Self, and their analysis of Astral Self I need to think more on, but the initial analysis of the monk kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And it's because they presented the idea that the monk is a terrible class. Monks are really bad in 5e. In fact, they're not quite as bad as Beastmaster Ranger, but they're really close. And their justification for that was, in their experience, that they get hit all the time, they get hit more often, they have low hit points, and their damage output is terrible. However, in my experience of playing monks, yes, my hit points are lower, but especially at higher levels, by the time I get Diamond Soul, I'm proficient in all of my saving throws, and I have evasion. I'm a lot harder to hit. If I've been, now, this is where also I think a stat array, like a standard array, will be different. Your defenses will be a little bit different. But if you're rolling for stats, the monk does benefit pretty well from that, because if you can max out your dex and your wisdom, then you'll get like an automatic plus 10 to your AC, and then it becomes 20. If you have bracers of defense, cloak of protection, and a ring of protection, your AC is now 24. And you have evasion, and your proficiency bonuses are pretty good. Now, all of that being said, the monk was supposed to be self-sufficient. And I think about them in the sense that you can punch ghosts. You're not dependent like the fighter is on the gear that you have so that you can be effective in combat. The idea is it's all about you as a singular entity. You can move really well, especially coupled with the mobile feat, and even Drunken Master, you can hit somebody and then get away without causing an attack of opportunity. The idea is to move around the battlefield. And I wonder if the defining feature of the monk is actually the Stunning Strike, which means their purpose isn't damage output. I've never been a monk that can really deal a lot of damage, but my most effective thing is Stunning Strike. All the time. That is the thing that burns legendary resistances. It's the thing that, at least in my experience so far. I'm watching John, and he's got thoughts. I know you were going to get there. But it brought up some things. I still want to think more about it. It started enough of a blog post that I'm like, there's things I want to say about this. And yet, as we've been able to discuss well enough on this show, I'll present an idea that is my perspective. And I do so here because I know you two will come at it from another angle that I don't have because I'm not you. So let's open it up. What do you think? My main concept here is, has this person misdefined what the core role is of the monk, and therefore it's colored their perception? Or there's a lot more to say about the value of the monk. They really put them low on the totem pole. But in my experience, I've really enjoyed the monk. So what other elements can we bring out from here?
All right. First of all, take away Stunning Strike. What's the value of the monk? my answer to it is, first of all, if you have a DM that's willing to look at how the game is actually played versus the game's designed system, you're probably always going to have more fun. So what I would start this with, and I don't know who wrote this blog post, and I don't know what their experiences are because I'm not them. Whenever I've had a monk player, I've made sure to give them stuff so that they felt more effective. So I've been very liberal, for lack of a better term, in giving them bracers of defense, cloak of protection, ring of protection, making sure they have equipment that is going to cover their mechanical deficiencies. Out of the core classes, I recently did a live stream ranking all 13 official classes just by kind of a full encapsulation of just broadly looking at their overall effectiveness and the variety of subclasses they bring to the table, what general ranking they have, what tier. And to me, Monk is a B tier class, right? Along with Barbarian. And the reason for that is Bear Totem Barbarian is like one of the most powerful class builds in the game. No argument. But if you look at all of Barbarians, right? Barbarian literally runs the gamut from S tier amazing subclasses all the way to Battle Rager, which is like, I can never find a reason why I'd suggest that class to someone. F tier, it fails. So overall, if you take everything to account, if I'm being nice to Barbarian, B tier. Not the best, not the worst. And Monk kind of falls in the same category.
So when I think about the value of Monk and whether or not it's a good class or something, I can agree that it is a B tier class. It's not the best, not the worst, but it can definitely be rewarding when you commit to it. A lot of people multi-class with Monk, sometimes with Rogue or something like that, just to get extra damage if that's what they're prioritizing as their character. But I've just taken out the player's handbook here, and I was looking at just what the class provides and what the subclasses provide in a party sense, to get a sense of what the intended role of Monk is. So is it a tank? That is damage per round? Is it support? Is it control? Or something else entirely? And we talk about how Monk is self-sufficient. So what that really means is that Monk has little to gain from being in the party, but that can also mean that it has a lot to give. So if we take away Stunning Strike, which is just the base thing, and we look at the subclasses and stuff, because everything else is just benefiting the Monk, right? If we look at the subclasses, Way of the Open Hand is another way to benefit the party, causing enemies to not take reactions, causing them to get pushed or displacing them. So those are control elements, right? If we go to Way of Shadow, you get a bunch of spells for your key points, like Darkness, Dark Vision, Pass Without Trace, Silence. These are spells that can be considered control or buff. And so going on towards Way of the Four Elements, which we all have our own problems with, you get a variety of elemental spells, like Cone of Cold. There's also Hold Person at 6th level. You can do Stone Skin, but only on yourself. So that's another self-sufficient thing. So if I'm just considering all of these different abilities that you could go into with Monk just based on the PHB, I would even say that Monk is one of those classes that doesn't gain much from being in the party, but is really useful for the party as a whole. Definitely has a role in it, which I would even say is probably control. Displacing folks, preventing reactions, stunning them, other things like that. And so it's like Adam was saying, this guy on the blog was saying, you get hit a lot. You don't do a lot of damage. Well, maybe that's not what you should be prioritizing. You can make a damage dealing Monk if your party is like more interested in control or support or something like that. And you can definitely be the front line if you need to. But your abilities are more geared towards setting up everyone else, in my opinion. Setting up your rogue for sneak attack because you have Step of the Wind. You have other things that allow you to disengage and stuff. You have your reactions thing. That's always good. If you can, you're preventing them from taking opportunity attacks when you use open hand technique. And not to mention shadow step, allowing yourself to set up advantage for your other comrades and stuff. So that's what I think when I see the value of the monk is a kind of, not the best, not the worst, but it can really fit that niche where you need a melee character and you need them to be able to set up your other characters so they can be their best selves.
My thought on the monk as a quick aside before you jump in there, John, is that it's control. Because it's a nickel and dime hit of damage, that your main role is to go pop, no reactions, pop, stunning strike, pop this, and be able to just kind of come through. I have the vision of like a zippy little, of course I use my kobold, of like rushing through, and I've done this in a fight where we've been swarmed by something, and I've literally run through the battlefield and gone, stun, up, stun didn't work, flurry of blows, okay, stun, and set up the barbarian and the rogue to sneak attack and like have advantage on things so they can crit and be fine. But I know I'm not going to get those killing blows, but my damage output isn't the point. It's setting up my other friends.
Yeah, and we have to really define what the control role means. Control ultimately is amplifying the effectiveness of your party by either somehow debilitating or opening up whatever their goal is, and taking away options that the other person has, right? So the reason I asked, what is a monk without stunning strike, is because in terms of the features that you get from monk, you're avoiding the equipment dependency, like you talked about, Adam, with like fighter has, because you have a feature that addresses, even though your martial arts might not be the most damaging ability, it can still count as magical and you can punch ghosts, right? Now, but also, like I said, monk is, if you look at what ability scores it needs to perform well, it suffers from multiple ability score dependency, right? Because really you need a competitive dexterity, constitution, and wisdom in order to be effective. And if you're running a standard array, which I know a lot of the monks that you've experienced, Adam, have not run, then that can that's going to change its effectiveness, right? Because it can't contribute if it's at 0 and incapacitated. And usually because the monk abilities, including the save throw DC against stunning strike and these other control elements, are wisdom based, a monk has to prioritize dexterity and wisdom over constitution. And that constitution hit can make it so that you're a 10th level monk, you only have like 60 or 70 hit points. And if you think about 10th level threats, it only takes one missed save to knock you to 0, right? So that's really the thing I'm pointing out, is the structure of your game is going to affect the enjoyability of each class. And that this person may have very legitimate experiences where monk is about as effective as ranger. That's how bad it is. Because if I think back to Thursdays, there would be games where, Ken would run in, get knocked to 0 as a monk, can't contribute. You can't have fun rolling the dice if you don't get a turn to roll the dice, And I think that's a very, it's an important part of the game's design to consider, is that, you've got to be able to stay up and take a turn in order to take a turn, So with monk in particular, if we look at the unarmored defense, I agree. I'm a sucker for an unarmored defense class. I think that unarmored defense is one of the most powerful features of the game, and it can be highly rewarding to play a class that, allows you to have an unarmored defense. The difference between monk and a lot of the other unarmored defense classes is that monk's other features only work if it's unarmored defense. Barbarian, a lot of its features can work with it, but a lot of them are like, are you wearing light or medium armor? All these features still work. Whereas monk specifically says, as soon as you equip light armor, all of these features shut off for you. So you have to do Unarmored Defense. On average, if you're using an ability score array, you're going to start with a +3 Dex and a +3 Wisdom and a +1 Constitution. So you're going to have minimal hit points, but you're going to have a competitive armor class to, say, a fighter wearing chainmail, right? Maybe not even, though, because a fighter wearing chainmail can also equip a shield, so their AC is at an 18 at first level, right? So you're getting pretty good armor class, low hit points, which can start to become a problem, if it doesn't matter if you're not getting hit often, it doesn't take that many hits to knock you to 0, And even though it still has a full action economy, which can help for things like exploration, so Shadow Step, Step of the Wind, all of those mobility features, and its higher speed, it can help there. But a lot of times if you're facing a well-rounded encounter, it doesn't matter what the monk's speed is. They can just snipe it with an arrow. They can just hit it, So I think that monk is a very technical class. I can see if somebody ran a standard array game and it's at lower levels and it's you don't have a lot of magic items that are specifically designed to shore up its weaknesses, why you may lose its enjoyability, right? Because if you're at a low enough level, you don't have enough key points to just be spamming them all the time. You don't have enough damage output to feel useful. You don't have raw stats in order to have a competitive armor class. And remember, if you're going to max out your AC, you have to spend 4 out of your 5 ability score improvements on not feats. You have to max out the relevant stats, and you still have an extremely low hit point count, right? So it's one of those things why someone would see that it's as weak as, like, say, Ranger, right? Which also suffers from some of those problems. Also, I think that this has to do with the encounter design. Stunning Strike is a Constitution save. All of the monk's major control features are save-based. If you have a DM that has a creature that has a +9 Constitution save, Stunning Strike isn't going to go off. And if it does, it's probably going to happen at the end of the fight. It might, but the likelihood is that it isn't. So this is a case where it's like, all of the things I keep trying to do always fail. What's the point of the class? I can see that narrative start to develop earlier on in somebody's D&D career, if, again, they're not getting the support from the DM in order to let their major things go off. I also think that a lot of times, if somebody tries to use the monk to substitute another role, that's where they can feel dissatisfied. So I think back to Thursdays where we didn't really have a dedicated tank. We tried to use the monk, but the monk's hit point count didn't allow it to absorb enough of the threat range for it to feel effective, right? There's other times where, say, you don't have a dedicated damage dealer, so you try to have the monk do that. The martial arts die doesn't really keep up. So it falls into the same pivoting role as the ranger, where it's like, do I need to contribute to damage, like Ian said? The barbarian is the real tank and damage dealer, but the monk is still contributing. They still feel useful, adding in points of damage, even if they aren't doing 250 smite damage to end a big epic boss encounter, So there are ways that the monk can contribute, and I'm not arguing that it doesn't have value. It's more that if we realistically look at the statistics that go behind the class's design, I can see, if you're looking at the class in a vacuum, why it may appear weaker or might play weaker without the encounter design, the DM's input, and the player's input taken into consideration.
This lends a lot more credence back to our main rest model, and the idea that this is a group game. That when we play our characters and our classes, this is not done in a vacuum. It is done at a table with other people, whether that be digital or otherwise. And communication is really key in being able to advocate for a better experience at the table, whether it be, literally I go to John and say, I would like to play better, please. What can we do about that? Or the DM notices the issues and will elevate the experiences of each of the players. And also, is it the game's raw? Like, is it the duty of the raw to make it always a satisfying experience? And I would argue no, because this is a group game, and different experiences will happen at different tables. So I have had a lot of great experiences as a monk, but I've also been gifted with the DMing styles of John and of other people that I've worked with, and they have all been very receptive to allowing the monk to shine. So great. However, if you have not had those experiences, then your perception of the class will have changed. It's
Yeah,
worth
and
considering.
especially if you're the DM and you're trying to look at the classes thing, the question you should be asking isn't, why is the monk so not powerful? It's, what have I been doing in my encounter design that it doesn't have a role to play? You know? And again, this isn't to say you should make every class feel awesome all the time, because always succeeding is just as boring as always failing. So if you find that your monk is always failing, are you having just set piece encounters with one big bad guy with a big constitution save, so the monk's stunning strike never gets used and it feels like an ineffective feature? Or are you creating a pattern of encounters where, say, you know, one encounter was against 8 bandits? Were they challenging bandits? No. But it was really fun to be able to stunning strike and then interrogate the bandit afterward, or to set up my rogue to be able to use their sneak attack feature because I granted them advantage by knocking them down with open hand, you know? Or this time we're playing against a caster with a bunch of undead soldiers. I use my open hand strike on the caster. They can't take reactions now. So he can't use that annoying freaking shield spell, so that now my other players feel more effective. I've contributed in that way. So when you're looking at your encounter design, this all leads back to encounter design. And, you know, what challenges are you giving your players with the knowledge of what puzzle pieces they have to be able to fit the situation that they're in, you know? So for a rogue, it's going to be damage and mobility. Rogue, I think, is one of the most elegantly designed classes because it's obvious what the rogue is good at, you know? With monk, because it's such a technical, rules-based class, it can both feel ineffective or effective depending on the player, depending on the situation, you know?
It seemed that this person was hell-bent on the idea that there's such a low damage output, this makes them a bad class. When my thought was that damage isn't the only outcome, that you can do other things than just deal damage.
If damage is an outcome that's relevant to you, look at the overall damage your party is dealing through your contribution. One of the benefits of having a quantity for damage is it allows you to measure your party's combat effectiveness with a very defined concrete metric. So, for example, if you say, let's swap the monk out with a different class, right? Let's say we swap it out with a fighter. You know, you have fighter, rogue, wizard, cleric, right? Let's say classic party. Let's say the fighter on their turn dealt 10 damage, the rogue dealt 18 because it's a better damage dealer. The wizard and cleric together, they dealt like 5 damage each, right? Let's just say it's that. Together, how much damage did I just say? 38 total. As a party, you dealt 38 damage. Now let's sub out the wizard for a monk. And the monk sets up their thing so that now the other 3 characters have advantage on their attack rolls because they either knocked it prone or they did stunning strike. Now all of a sudden there's a greater chance for a crit, right? So let's say that crit goes to the rogue that not only got their sneak attack, but they had advantage, right? Now that rogue's 18 damage might be 23. Or the fighter's damage might be like 15 or 20 instead of 10, you know? Or they're hitting more often, you know? So yes, the monk isn't a good damage dealer, but it allowed the total amount of damage outputted by the party to be greater. So, and that's what can make support and control classes frustrating. You may not be doing the big damage, but you've got to look at what your party's total output is. And if damage is a clean metric that can determine how successful you are, that's great. And also, what is that saying about the encounters that your DM is presenting? That damage is the only reliable metric, as opposed to I don't know, talking to the enemy creature or scouting beforehand, or your utility features that can help set up a trap that you can lure the enemy creature to. I just think there are so many more dimensions to the game that you're right, Adam. We do get stuck a lot of times with the hard rules as written metrics when, again, to bring it back to Ian's original thing, what attracts people to the game is the situational freedom that it allows for.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to today's episode of the DM Shower Thoughts. This show is a proud member of the Darkmoor Podcast Network, so please go check out darkmoorpodcasts.com for all the other shows that we are partnered with, and you'll go see our page, too. You can also find this podcast on YouTube, and we have a YouTube channel as well as other videos, so look for DM Shower Thoughts over at YouTube. This podcast uploads every Friday on Podbean at noon and comes out on Spotify and iTunes. You can find us there. Maybe leave a little review, perhaps, for us on iTunes. It really helps the show out. And we have a Patreon. So if you go look for us on Patreon. It'll be linked down below as well. Go find DM Shower Thoughts over on Patreon and see what other cool ways you can do to help out the show and grow our listening base and all our production stuff. And there's lots up there, so go check it out. You can also find blog posts by myself, Ian, and John over at adamsdrakeproductions.com at the GM's Corner. And those go up Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays all over the place. But just, check it out and you'll find some new things there. All right, everybody. Have a wonderful day, and please, game responsibly. Bye-bye now.
I strive to defend New Talos and live up to my role as a spiritual leader.
I journey to increase my knowledge of the cusp and cosmos. It has been prophesied that there is destiny in my blood.
I fight for the honor of the name Steadyhand and the great kingdom of Earth.
I wander to find my true place in the world. I will protect my home and family at all costs.
A young ruler's grasp for power threatens an already fractured world. Meet the heroes in Arc 2 of Advantage, a 5th edition D&D audio drama. Find us on all podcast apps.